for tuning in to Coder Conversations. If you want to catch up on any past episode or reach out to us, visit us at www.coderconvos.com. I'm your host, Kevin, and I'm with
Brian Russick, professional drummer, drum teacher based out of the Suffolk County, Long Island, New York area. If you want to book a lesson with me, I could be found at brianrussick.com.
And for today's guest, we have an award-winning journalist and much more, John Aidan Byrne. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thanks, man. Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Typically we get started by asking our guests a little bit about themselves. So can you tell us about yourself and how did you get into journaling?
Yeah, so it's a long journey. I'm originally from Ireland, and I dipped my toes in the print market when I was a youngster. Growing up, all the regional papers in Ireland had stringers, correspondence in each little town and parish and so on, and I had the wonderful opportunity to contribute to a local newspaper. And I guess I must have been doing something right because I saved up all those clips. There was no electronic media back then, obviously. So I'm aging myself a little bit. I sent them to another provincial newspaper. And when they had a job opening, I was hired for that job. It was the Longford News in the Midlands of Ireland. I stayed with them for a bunch of years, had great memories of some of the stuff we covered, the many colourful characters in Ireland, rural Ireland, essentially. And then in the mid-'80s, Ireland was suddenly struck by a major recession. The country experienced something unlike anything that had hit it in a generation. So there were massive layoffs. There was a big drop in spending. Media was affected. My wife and I, or my wife-to-be and I, made the wise decision in hindsight, although we missed our family a lot, we still miss them, and many friends, to emigrate to America. And we came here in the mid-'80s and went out to Queens. And I actually went to stay with my cousin. I'm going to mention her name because she's just passed, and she did a lot for us and a wonderful person, Dr. Monica Brennan, who was a professor of Irish history out in SUNY University out there in Long Island. Brian, that area might be familiar to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I stayed with Monica for a short while. Then we had it's a little convoluted. I came out ahead of my wife, and so I found us a nice place to stay out in near Woodhaven Boulevard, that area, and we had our place out there. My wife joined me. I mentioned just before we came on air that one of the first jobs, I held multiple jobs. I just didn't go back into journalism. I did any work I could find, bartending, construction, whatever. And I, tried to see were there any openings in journalism. I ended up doing some work part-time for Jim O'Connor, a gentleman called Jim O'Connor and Elise O'Connor. And they had what was then called the Irish Advocate, and they had a travel agency. They were really interesting, quite colourful. Name didn't sort of resonate with me until I mentioned to somebody who I was working with, and Elise told me, "Oh, one day when we were working, putting the newspaper to bed, oh, give me a moment, John. I have to talk to my son, Jim O'Connor. He's an actor in Hollywood." And it still didn't resonate with me. And I learned just shortly thereafter they were talking about the Jim O'Connor of All in the Family fame, and he was in multiple TV series. He was a great character. Of course, All in the Family. We could go down a rabbit hole and dissect the cultural resonance of that then and now, but that was my experience then. I eventually moved from all these bits of jobs and all the construction and the building and so on, I eventually ended up working full time for several Irish American newspapers. Went from that to working in what's known as B2B media. Worked at McGraw-Hill at Securities Week. I worked at Securities Industry Daily, some other publications. And then I got hired at Traders Magazine, which was then published by Source Media. And I ended up being their editor for a number of years, covering Wall Street stock trading, the equity markets, the options markets, and got a lot of exposure to the financial markets, which was quite eye-opening. I mean, coming from Ireland, I had never, I'd seen images of the New York Stock Exchange on the big screen. I'd seen the movie Wall Street, but I'd never quite, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd never
great movie. Great movie.
I never had quite, kicked the financial tires, but I got onto the floor of the New York Stock Exchanges. I was on trading desks at Merrill Lynch, UBS. It was just an amazing, jaw-dropping experience, and quite intimidating because, while I was reasonably financial savvy, I didn't have a full background in the trading markets, but I learned on the job. I think I did a good job, and I met some great characters and interviewed. Among the people I interviewed when I was at Traders Magazine was the late Byrne Madoff.
Oh, wow.
Byrne L. Madoff. I did
Yeah.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was your impression of him?
He was an enigma. And I've learned different things about him and his family since I left. Some people describe Byrne to me as a kind of a control freak. When you went to his office, everything in it had to be placed carefully. He didn't want anything out of place. The curtains had to be draped properly and so on. He might have been gripped by a certain paranoia at some page in his life, that he might be discovered, if you will, because he was obviously accused of, a mass Ponzi scheme. Because one day I got a call from Byrne when I was working on that cover story, which was quite revealing, because he was talking about the massive returns he was getting for his investors, like double-digit returns. And I guess it was a question with some people of don't ask, don't tell. I mean, there might have been people out there suspicious of these returns or whatever. But, I remember Byrne calling me from a golf course on Long Island. I think he was getting off a helicopter. And he said to me, "John, get all the facts right and don't screw it up and don't make me look bad." Something on those, because somebody burnt me a couple of years earlier.
Yeah.
And that was true. Somebody did a story. I think it was Barron's was one of the first to ask questions about his business operations. We didn't quite go down that path because we were primarily interested in what we understand to be his legitimate NASDAQ market making operations. I think that the scandal emanated from his wealth management practice, which was on another floor, and which I didn't get to visit. And he didn't really allude to that. But I remember we were sitting in his conference room, and I was dealing with very high powered people. Here's this Irish guy off the boat, so to speak. I never figured I'd be in the lipstick building, interviewing Byrne Madoff, Peter, and people be, coming in with, cups of coffee and offering me this thing and that thing. Are you okay, Mr. Byrne? I said, "No, Mr. Byrne, just call me John." But I remember when I was taking notes and I was concentrating, I saw Peter suddenly throw a glance over at me and look at me deeply for a couple of seconds. I didn't know what the stare was about, but it was like he was weighing me up, you know. Will Byrne screw me over or not? I don't know. But we did the interview, and I got a call from Byrne afterwards, and I wasn't my hands weren't shaking. And he said that was a great story. He said so. I guess we didn't peel back the onion, so to speak. But yeah, that was something.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like when dealing with such high profile individuals, I know you probably have to, carefully think ahead, think about what you're going to ask them and how your questions will be perceived by the public. So, like, did you have like a routine before you started interviewing more of these high profile guests?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do it today, but back then I would do as much research as possible, newspaper clippings, which you can get. There was databases available then anyway, but it was a little more cumbersome. So I try to do a lot of that. I try to understand their business practice. If I was anyways confused, I would ask somebody explain this to me, because to go in raw and not understand is a fool's errand. And then I talk to people. What do you think of this guy? What do you think of that? What do you think is how he operates, and so on? And that's a way to line up interesting quotes and color for a story, if it's a one-on-one or any kind of a business story or human interest story.
Okay, so like, how do you balance, respecting their boundaries versus actually getting the truth out and not putting out like a softball interview, like where you actually get into some meat?
Well, I like to be direct with people, and push the envelope. But I'm not a big proponent of gotcha journalism, where you want to be mean spirited with somebody, where you want to bring them down almost intentionally, because that's a cruel sport. I kind of like to, if somebody is running a business and there's been legitimate questions asked about that business, I like to address it and let them answer it, and let the reader decide. They may push back, um, but that's you know to be an honest to God journalist, you have to ask the tough questions sometimes. Otherwise, if they want to get um, a marketing piece, or a puff piece, then buy an ad, as somebody said. Buy an ad. An editor in the Post said to me once, the guy, if that's the way they want to do, take a full page ad in the New York Post. They don't want to
Right.
give you, if they want to just blindside us.
Yeah, so like with the interviewing thing, I know sometimes you can have like a overall interview that's perceived as positive, but it can also be perceived as negative. Like, have you ever had a situation where maybe you lost a future interview because they didn't necessarily like what you said in the last one, or anything
Yeah,
along those lines?
yeah, I did. I lost some famous ones, and I can't mention their names. And some of it, in hindsight, is hilarious. I won't mention the gentleman's name, but he was, and maybe still is, a top CEO and chairman of a major bank. Just leave it at that. I wrote a piece on his. He was a major trader on Wall Street, and I wrote a piece on his trading operations when I was at Securities Week, and I wrote what I believe to be an honest to God piece. And he was so angry after that, he would never take my calls.
Yeah.
So years passed, and I ended up actually making breaking bread with him, and making good on it. And we suddenly became fast friends again. And he ended up giving me an exclusive about his move to this bank, which I can't mention. And that was a scoop of a lifetime. It was brilliant. But I wanted to keep my dignity at the same time. And
Right.
I met an analyst one day in New York City who covers Wall Street. And I asked him, because I just thought it could be a good line of inquiry, it could be an interesting angle. Do you ever think this bank will be sold to a buyer? Is that still on the cards? And he went off on a stream of consciousness, and he says, "Yeah, I think so." So I reported it, right? And my former friend become my new enemy and wouldn't talk to me again. Well, he would, but in very hostile terms. And he upbraided me at a press conference, of which I laughed off. And I said, look, that's what the analyst said. You're picking on the wrong guy here. Bit thin-skinned, if you will.
So, like you mentioned earlier that the kind of like the movie industry and how they painted things in a particular way. Like, was the reality like similar to the movies from what you experienced, or was it like extremely exaggerated in the movie?
In which like
Let's just say like Wolf of Wall Street or something like where.
oh, you're talking about the life and time, the work, the life and lifestyles on Wall Street. Well, that's a really interesting question because sometimes perception is reality. So if you go to Wall Street, that great, just brilliant movie. And then you go to the Wolf of Wall Street and various spin-offs and so on. Um, they're not aligned with the everyday goings on Wall Street. However, the the corruption and the color and the excitement and the drama that's described in both movies is a fact of life. Is a fact of life. But in the movie making industry, you need to have a storyline. You need to have a good, strong, compelling narrative. And you need color and you need lead characters and you need to get the attention of mass audiences. Otherwise, why would you produce that? So there is some creative license, but and there's various Madoff movies made. So that by and large, a lot of the Madoff movies was quite close to the bone. I will say that much. But for the vast majority of people who work on Wall Street, some of it's just humdrum. They're honest to goodness people. They're ethical, and they bristle and get hot under the collar if you would suggest that there's nothing but greed and unwanted fear on Wall Street, because that's not how I consider people on Wall Street, most of whom are my friends. Most of them live very good lives, family people, contribute to their community, and do all the right things. But the movie side, yeah, some of that's based on, vignettes, if you will, of things that have happened based on, Department of Justice indictments, criminal indictments, and so on.
So, were you actually able to talk to some of the other, I would say, like investment titans, like maybe Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Peter Lynch?
I didn't talk to any of those, but I've talked to, I've talked to a bunch of people. I had an interesting interview with Peter Schiff, who may not be as well known, but he to me is the most interesting interview out there on Wall Street, because he's a perennial bear, if you will. He thinks we're in danger of imminent collapse. The economy, the globe, and so on, because of our massive and growing debt mountains across the globe, and that his attitude is that the bond markets in America won't eventually be able to pay our bills, because then foreign investors will get scared and say this is a very bad bet. But his rationale for outlining that is just fascinating. So I interviewed Peter a few times, and not quite an investment banker, but in his day, he was a household name. Jeffrey Robinson, author of blockbusters such as The Laundryman. He's done a lot of TV. He's made movies. And his insight was to the amount of money that has been swindled and laundered, in the financial markets and on Wall Street, and, put into offshore accounts, and how it's done. He's been sort of out of circulation for a couple of years. He's not a big crypto fan, but some of the stuff he told me has been, you know, jaw dropping, really, and quite extraordinary in the scale and scope of how some of these schemes have been done.
From what you're able to share, like what are some of the more interesting insights?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of money circulating the globe, um, and a lot of it is dark money and it's illicit money. I mean, ranging from money that's raised by drug dealers. It could be people trying to avoid taxes. It could be criminal money. Um, it could be money that somebody landed in a trust and they want to avoid paying more taxes on it. I mean, some of the way the money avoids taxation or moves into tax havens. Some of it, I believe, it moves into cryptocurrencies. I think a lot of bad dark money has gone into cryptocurrencies. According to Jeffrey and others, a lot of the money avoids taxes by just buying up vast properties, and seemingly there are property fronts all over the globe today which are unoccupied because they've been bought maybe by some institutional investor, but some of it have been bought up by maybe criminal enterprises. And it's just a way to park the money. And then, of course, a lot of the money goes through some of the well-known tax havens. And it's, while maybe in theory not illegal, you wonder, does it kind of skirt the ethical boundaries?
That's interesting. Who is your favorite person that you did interview in the financial markets?
Peter Schiff would probably rank among one of them. My other one, who covers the financial markets, is an up and coming filmmaker called Jimmy Robinson, who is out with 3 movies on our debt bubble. And he has a production company called not Flying Aces, but letusdisagree.com. And for those, I interviewed him for my podcast, and he's interviewed a lot of the big money people, like a former central banker, all the people, Jimmy, Robin, the name will come to me later, but some of the big names in finance he's interviewed, obviously,
Right.
including Peter Schiff.
Right.
And his theories and his way of analyzing the debt market and what we should be aware of and what we should equip ourselves for makes for sober viewing.
So, like, is a general consensus that we're more headed towards like a bearish market just due to like the national debt and our current policies, or do you have like a mix of opinions, some more optimistic, or
Well, nobody. That's the when you're trying to nail some of these people down on coming up with a date. Are we going to, are the markets going to explode next year, the year after? Nobody actually knows. I mean, some of it is how far we can kick the proverbial can down the road. Some of it has to do with how long will foreign investors buy US debt, because if they stop buying it, we can't finance a lot of our liabilities and unfunded liabilities and pay our funding for the US government. But they say when it comes, it's going to be, it's not going to be pretty. And Jimmy sort of lays out 2 scenarios. He thinks we have to cleanse the system, cleanse the financial markets, like we did, people forget, in 1921 when we had a depression for 1 year, believe it or not, and we cut government spending by 46%. And then, of course, we had a bigger depression in the 1930s. He thinks we literally have to do something like that. And that was obviously what the attempts of Doge were, reining in government spending. So the scenario then is just a Great Depression or else, this is the one I posed to him. I says, Jimmy, potentially, seeing that we've had a trial run with COVID and the government put in multiple trillions of dollars into the economy during COVID and sent us many people checks, the infrastructure in place, if the markets and everything did collapse, one of the alternatives is, I think, the government could secure everybody's assets and do a barter and say, hey guys, we'll take your remaining mortgage, we'll take all your remaining debt, we'll take everything, your notes and so on, and we'll send you checks, but everything will be owned and managed for an indefinite period by the US government. And he says, yeah, that's actually a possibility if you think about it, because the government are all well invested in the economy as it is, and they've succeeded with COVID propping up a lot of companies that would have otherwise gone bankrupt with trillions. And obviously, COVID is a whole separate story.
Yeah, for sure.
You asked me, some of the people I interviewed in the I interviewed John Katzimatidis, who is a billionaire and a big magnate, and he owns and runs grocery chain, and he owns a radio station. God bless him. But he, interestingly enough, was quite critical in an indirect way with government policies during COVID, and how it has made the poorer classes poorer and the rich much richer, and is just hollowing out the middle class. The point being is that when you meddle too much in markets, you really can't get it right, because the best market interactions are between humans, and with some regulation, obviously, to protect us against greed and fraud and so on, but much less than we would have now.
Yeah, I know there's a lot of people that say all of the stimulus greatly increased inflation just due to that huge influx of money flooding the market, and prices went up, but they never came back down.
Yeah, well, if you look at the ranks of the billionaire class, they grew substantially post-COVID, and that was because, largely in part, I believe, because of the stimulus money. And it was, before I came on, I was just reading the Wall Street Journal, how. And by the way, I'm not a socialist by any means. I believe we need free markets and everything, but we also need some kind of fair play. But
Sure.
An interesting article on today's Wall Street Journal: the number of people who are rich has surged. The club of ultra high net worth individuals with more than 30 million in assets hit a record in 2024, according to estimates from Altrada. The US, listen to this, the US added more than 1,000 millionaires. It's so frightening. It's so amazing. I can't even pronounce the word now. 1,000 millionaires every day last year on average, according to UBS. The billionaire club grew more than 50% between 2015 and 2024. And
Wow.
a lot of that has to do with government stimulus. I mean, it also has to do with entrepreneurship, the free markets too. It's not all down to the government, but and the AI revolution, and the stock market, which, to be honest, seems kind of fraughty.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about algorithms running trading or things similar to that?
Well, if I could understand algorithms and explain them to you intelligently here, I would probably have a second day job. I have mixed feelings about them. Algorithms were coming to the fore when I was at Traders Magazine. I remember interviewing Matt Andreessen, who set up or helped set up the Island ECN, and they sort of work trading on automated pilot. One of the great unknowns is how algorithms might fare if we had some kind of a world shock, a big outbreak in Europe, or something happened with on interest rates, or some major announcement that spooked the financial markets. How would all these program trades work on the trading desks? Like in the recent past, the New York Stock Exchange had breakers in place. I believe they do, but I don't know what the parameters are. That if markets move too fast, the markets would stop operating to prevent too much of a downdraft. And these algorithms are only on Wall Street and in financial markets are only as good as the programmers. And a lot of trading now is really 80% algorithms and traders, algorithms and not human traders. The human traders just intervene, when there's some kind of technical issue, or at the opening of the market, or at the closing in New York, for sure. But they could be signaled in a way that could move contrary to the intention and could plunge us into an overnight bear market. That's conceivably possible. Some people have blamed these programs for past markets. We're always looking for scapegoats, but that's as good as any of them.
Sure.
Yeah, and I know, like you mentioned, the stock market in a way it seems kind of scammy, and decades ago there was a book by Burton Malkiel, A Random Walk Down Wall Street, and he said like institutional investors, most of them can't even beat a market index, so the everyday investor, they don't even have a chance. And I feel like this is going to be increasingly so with the advent of AI coming into investing. And I feel like, the institutions and people that have the more powerful versions of AI, there's going to be a huge divergence in their gains versus, somebody trying to do it the old fashioned way. What has the consensus been on AI from the different people that you've spoken with?
Well, that's a good to raise that point. Of course, that the SEC is pro free markets, much more pro free markets than the previous incumbents. And I know there's very brilliant people. I know one or two of them quite well, and they're very pro crypto. I know quite a bit, but they seem to be taking their hands off the levers of, they're going in the direction of less regulation, and some of that really is good. But I don't think they should move with prudence on AI, because there have been issues raised that while AI, we don't want to be Luddites. We do want AI in, medicine and productivity gains and so on and so forth. But in terms of how it's applied on Wall Street, we've got to be really careful. And I think that's a cause for deeper investigation. How will AI be used? Who will have the better programs? Who will be advantaged over others? The big conversation 10 years ago was, who had the fastest algorithms that could shoot orders to the New York Stock Exchange floor in microseconds. Could you shave a second off? So people were moving their servers closer to the market centers. So we may have a repeat of that under the AI guys. Who has the best AI game in town?
Right, and then they'll probably constantly be shifting.
Yeah, I think so. But some of the biggest firms are investing heavily in AI, and obviously, as an investment play, AI is huge. There's a lot of money going into AI. We know that, and which raises another question: will we have an AI bubble burst if too much money pours in unrestrained? Because, as there is this maxim: fear and greed. To some people, that's what finance is about: fear and greed, fear of missing out. We had a dot-com bubble, and that shook out, and it crashed, and then a lot of people picked up the carcasses, and then there was a whole lot of mergers and acquisitions from the remains of all the fire sales. So not wishing that, but it's something that you would think could be a possibility.
I think another concern with AI as well is just like the privacy of the information, because there's been more recent news stories of AI spit back private conversations, or certain data gets in and it comes back out. So I'm pretty sure a lot of companies, they have a lot of concerns about protecting their data.
Oh yeah, yeah, they absolutely do. But I don't know how foolproof any of that is. And the other issue is that, and it's a lesson for young talent and college graduates, school graduates, anybody who's entering the workforce, make sure you don't mess up your social media handles, because you can go on chat GPT and they can amalgamate your life history. And if there's errors in that, or bad stuff or negative stuff, you better get it scrubbed fast as possible.
Yeah, I think that really is interesting. Like, the internet is pretty much a catalog of our thoughts. So you better be very careful about what you say online. So I know you mentioned like cryptocurrency earlier is one of the reasons that the gentleman you spoke of earlier, he's not a huge fan of it, is possibly because of the control that, say, a government will have over the population. Like, if every financial transaction is tracked.
Well, I think Jimmy has. If you're referring to Jimmy, Jeffrey Robinson was the guy who is anti-crypto. Jeffrey Robinson wrote a book, one of the earliest books, criticizing Bitcoin. It was a Bitcoin on Bitcoin. I don't know if he'll ever revisit that, but I think Jimmy is no. I think Jimmy Morrison is reasonably. I'll let Jimmy speak for himself. My understanding is he is reasonably positive outlook on it, but you do have to ask yourself a question. I'm not pointing fingers, but I interviewed. Oh yeah, you asked me who was some of my favorite interviews. I better mention this: Dick Bove, a legendary bank analyst who last worked at Odeon Capital Group and spent over 50 years plus covering the markets, the housing, the financial crisis of 2008, the savings and loan crisis. His thoughts on crypto to me were the most interesting. And he disclosed that he has some investments in crypto. And his thing was, why is President Trump and maybe his family so heavily invested in crypto? As recently as a month or two ago, somebody reasoned or calculated, was Forbes, that something like 40 to 60% of Trump's wealth was in crypto, which is really hard to believe.
Wow.
I don't know if that story can be verified, but Forbes came out with that, and it's it's an extraordinary investment in cryptocurrency, and he wants to have a crypto star, and he was heavily backed by the crypto community, and there's talk now and speculation, and some of it's a reality, that you will be able to pay taxes in crypto at some point. At least one state will allow you to pay state taxes in crypto. Well, I think it's at the conversion rate on the day you pay, so that everybody cashes out equally. And so the further thought is that that'll go a step further, and that one day you may actually be allowed. And I think maybe Trump is going in this direction. He's bullish on crypto, that maybe at some point you'll be able to pay your federal taxes in crypto. So the big problem, according to Dick Bove, is that if the emphasis moves to crypto paying the US government and paying off our massive debt, which I think Trump has eyed using crypto to pay off our 35 to 38 trillion national debt, that actually weakens and punctures and decimates, or could decimate, the dollar as our so-called reserve currency.
Right.
So which is it? Is he trying to destroy our currency and then prop up, crypto? He's quite a brilliant man. I'm not anti-Trump, by the way, and I'm not, picking a fight here with him, but That's a difficult game to navigate, because the dollar, for all its problems and its massive problems, if this debt is not brought under control, is our reserve currency. That's why we can buy stuff all over the globe. 60% of the globe's transactions are done in US dollars. But if we lose the reserve status, we run the risk of becoming in Argentina. Argentina was at the same status almost as the US, in a former time before the rise of Peron in 1920s or whatever. It had major farming sector, industry, Buenos Aires. People emigrated to Argentina. Then it had corrupt government, and now it's part of the global South, and it's trying to get its currency back, obviously, but it's a tough sledding. So that's what I see as the story on crypto. What is the plan of the US government on crypto? And if you look at some of the appointments, seems to me, has appointed a lot of people who are pro crypto, and that's got to tell its own story.
Right.
So, like, what are your thoughts on the BRICS nation and them possibly being a threat to the U.S. dollar's reserve currency?
Well, that's been ongoing for a long time. I don't see that really going anywhere. Dick Beauvais used to talk about that. We had a podcast at Odeon Capital Conversations. If anybody wants to hear the past interviews, he always thought that BRICS presented some kind of a threat, but I think so far it's more symbolic. Because if you just take apart the different nations, two of them, Brazil and Russia, they're not exactly intact economies. I mean, for all the cheerleading going on, Russia is Russia's running into serious problems. It's running double-digit inflation. You talk about our interest rates. They have double-digit interest rates, and the central bank recently said they may have a recession coming up. And of course, can you believe a lot of the stuff? That's the stuff we understand is true. So much do we know going underneath the surface. So I don't see Russia and Brazil and all of those countries, India, forming an alliance that has cultural and economic integrity in the long run. And that's what you actually need to have an alternative currency.
Right. Now, what do you think about the future of the dollar? I know you had mentioned a little bit about that.
Well, this is where I get a bit more optimistic. Since Trump came into power, and I'm going to get some pushback on this, I've become more optimistic about the dollar. I don't like some of his policies, but I do agree with him in theory that we need to bring manufacturing back. We need to become a manufacturing nation again. So many places hollowed out, lost their manufacturing basis. I think he's got a razor sharp focus on growing the economy. We see the money he's making in on tariff taxes. We'll see how long that lasts. We had the big, beautiful bill. He's trying to eventually, but we'll see. This part I'm not optimistic about getting our debt down. I don't know. I mean, if you talk to people, the big, beautiful bill is going to raise our debt. Others says it's neutral. We just have to see. I think if the economy grows rapidly under Trump, and there's signs of that already, and we end up with budget surpluses, and we can control the spending, we'll get on top of the dollar. But if we don't, the outlook to me is dim.
Yeah.
And people don't even realize that. But if you talk to enough of the financial mavens, it's dim. If we lose the dollar, it's a very unhealthy, difficult, and not a good place to be in.
That's scary to think about, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think most of us are not old enough to have been through something like a Great Depression. So, if you can, what can you paint the picture of what it would be like if that situation occurred where the dollar gets supplanted? Like, what would everyday life look like?
Well, the cost of living would soar. The dollar would be very expensive when you go abroad. Imports would be through the roof in terms of costs. We wouldn't, we would imports would go down. Commerce would come to a halt, not to a full halt, but um, it would be impeded, if you will. Our trading relationships with other countries would be extraordinarily difficult. Or, we would, we fortunately enough, we're an oil producing nation. We have our own energy. So I want to offset some of this, that some of the pluses. We have our own energy. We have an entrepreneurial class. We have a good um, health education system. But if we enter that scenario where the dollar, lost its reserve currency, I think we would have all of those things. We'd have a Great Depression. We would have a Great Depression of some kind of eye popping proportions.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
Mhm.
So I'm guessing one outcome from that would be, though, that manufacturing will be brought back since we can no longer afford these imports. So maybe that's one positive outcome from it all. Because I think,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that could be an unintended consequence, that we'd start making our own stuff again, which I've always thought was a great idea. I never was a big fan of outsourcing. I mean, I am very happy for countries that have done well on this. Ireland has done well, but now it's in the crosshairs of tariffs. Some other countries have done well, but you know, I think having your own manufacturing, economically, culturally, financially, is just more prudent, and it's better for the integrity, of our communities.
It just makes sense. I think bottom line, it just makes sense.
Yeah,
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 I think it's incredibly dangerous to have something like your manufacturing outsourced, especially to a country that philosophically, politically, we're at odds with, like China. So, like, how can you get in a war with a country that's that's manufactured, that's creating the majority of your essential products? They could just simply, scale that way back, and so in a way, we become more and more reliant on them if we don't build our own manufacturing base again.
yeah. Correct. I mean, a lot of this impetus occurred during COVID. Supply chain fears. You know, um, a lot of manufacturers realized, oh, geez, there's a slowness in shipments from Asia Pacific and from wherever. We better start doing more for chips here back at home. So, uh, it's a more feasible and sensible proposition for sure.
So, from like the billionaires, the wealthy individuals you talk to, are they optimistic that things can turn around, or do they feel like there's an inevitable period of pain before things really start rebounding?
I think they're on the fence. They're seeing how the next couple of years develop. They're I think there's they've mixed feelings on the tariffs, obviously, but I think they sense more direction in the country now than there had been under the previous administration. Even though, let's be honest about it, tariffs can be quite unnerving because we don't know, what side of the bed President Trump has got out of in the morning. We don't know where he's going to
Right.
go with the things, but that's his game plan.
Right.
Um, but I think there's a lot of support for his big, beautiful bill, for getting manufacturing back, for the incentives, for the capital depreciation model. Um, and something that's not actually talked about, the in the big beautiful bill, he extended um, credits for so-called opportunity zones. Um, these are credits to qualified investor, typically institutions, wealthy families, who put their money into rundown neighborhoods in urban centers, maybe rural communities, and they can put it there and get great tax breaks. So that's a popular move too. I asked Jimmy Morrison, I said, Jimmy, you've interviewed all these rich guys, and one guy he interviewed had become a millionaire by age 37. And he made it investing in 10 years. He became super rich, and he cycled through China on a motorbike. And I said to him, what are these guys doing? What did he think? And so it was very interesting. They seem to be hedging their bet, buying commodities, buying agricultural products, some buying stock. Some of these rich people are running hedge funds. They're on sort of both sides of the trade, because if you do that intelligently enough and the stock market declines, somebody could be on the other side of the trade at a hedge fund. So these are very, very tuned in investors. But Jimmy said, look, none of the super rich want to see America goes under. What good is that? What good is that? If your neighbor is in personal grief and suicidal because, the economy is tanked or something, there's that aspect to it, the human aspect. And there's also the consumer aspect that, all these companies need consumers to purchase, their products.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the point I like to raise about AI and all of these robotics. If a lot of people are losing their jobs to robots and they're just sitting around unemployed for long periods of time, who's going to have the money to purchase the products? The economy at that point is going to kind of blow up on this stuff. I know they kind of recommended universal basic income, but do they really want to pay people to sit around doing nothing?
Well, it's an interesting thing about universal basic income. I had this conversation with a conservative businessman, and I said, gee, UBI sounds like something out of the page of Mao Zedong or communist China or something, like handing out a check and so on. He said, actually, funnily enough, there are a lot of people in conservative circles who actually supported the concept of universal basic income. And he said, and it has many manifestations. And one of them is in the charter school movement. In other words, instead of your taxes going to put your kid through the public school system, again, this is not a critique of the public school system. There's some wonderful teachers and pupils in that, but many people think it's, in some of our cities, it's broken. And in a lot of rundown neighborhoods, in New Jersey, New York, if you ask some of the parents, what's your first choice if you were given a voucher, right? That could be a universal basic income voucher of sorts. Where do you want your kid to go to? Do you want a public school down the street or to a charter school, privately run on the public, publicly run, but on a private model, if you will? They'd say a charter school. You can't get, these charter schools are turning away kids. So that's a form of universal basic income. So their rationale was that, it's better somebody, a consumer, an individual, using that universal basic income shit than the government spending it. I have mixed feelings about, a universal basic income. I think it could be widely abused, but I'm sort of open-minded about it. I don't propose it here, but the charter school system, if you consider that a form of universal basic income, I'm for that.
That's interesting. And you mentioned hedge funds. What do you really think about hedge funds? Do you think they are a positive thing that they exist? Or, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, some people think they're fear mongers, and they conjure up negative stories about companies out there, and they spread rumors to drive down a company's stock because they're on the other side of it. And some of that in isolated cases may be true. I know the owner of the New York Mets, that's my team, has a hedge fund in Greenwich, Connecticut. He got his knuckles wrapped by the SEC. But you know what? When you're managing multiple billions and trillions, you're going to be regulated anyway. To be honest, you're going to be regulated. And a little side story, I read somewhere, and I thought it was an interesting take on it, that this person wrote a piece, claims that the FBI, again, this is not a knock on the FBI, I have friends in the FBI, but the FBI has this practice or protocol of shaking down Wall Street. That could be far-fetched. I don't believe that's true, but his rationale, because I think there's a lot of decent people in it, but there may be corruption within the upper ranks of the FBI. We've heard that recently. But his rationale was that what they do is they'll pick out a soft target, maybe a hedge fund or a broker-dealer, and they'll run out a press release. Oh, broker-dealer ABC is under investigation, and it'll drive down the stock of that company. The hedge fund will swoop in. The company will settle for 2-3 million. And then maybe, lo and behold, they won't deny or admit guilt. And actually, maybe that company had done nothing wrong anyway. So the point I'm making is, how do we know it wasn't a de facto shakedown by the FBI? But back to your question about hedge funds, they're on the other side of the trade when things go wrong. If we didn't have them, some people say they bring stability to the marketplace. So you could debate that both ways.
Well, for my final question, what did you think? What do you think about companies like, say, like a BlackRock is, for example, owning like single family houses, like buying up the real estate market?
I got to be honest, I have mixed feelings about it, because I'm from Ireland originally. I just want to be clear, I'm a proud US citizen. I also hold citizenship in Ireland. Ireland had its own housing crisis, financial crisis in 2008, and a lot of the big money managers, I won't mention them by name, came in and bought up a lot of properties at fire sale prices, 40 cents on the dollar. And a lot of properties in Ireland now are run by investors. And the great fear is that when they get their investment, they're going to pull the plug and those properties will collapse. That's a big fear. Yeah, I mean, you hear that all the time, that a lot of the biggest money investors in America now is Wall Street. I think, yeah, I think it's something that raises issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But yeah, we're kind of at the top of the hour. Where can our guests find you at?
At my own website, johnaidanbyrne.com. I can be emailed at jaidanbyrne@optonline.net. I'm up there on Facebook. I have my own YouTube channel, Dig Life Deep, and my own on Spotify. And they can, I guess, text me prudently at
Yeah, right.
973-529-4699. That's my business phone, 973-529-4699. Brian and Kevin, I appreciate this really interesting, far-reaching conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, it was definitely a pleasure, man. We have to bring you back sometime.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we loved having you on tonight for sure.
Okay, thanks, Brian and Kevin. I appreciate this.
Like